First we blocked the bike up to drain all the oil over to the left side of the crankcase. In hopes that we don't have to drain the oil. We still may have to. And then I pulled this spring from here, the black one from here, with the needle nose pliers.
Okay.
We remove these two bolts to drop the floorboard. I need to remove this heat shield with these two Phillips screws. You need to use a number 4 screwdriver so you don't strip the screws out.
Go.
I removed 2 nuts to drop the exhaust down to expose our cover. I put a rag under here to protect my exhaust from being scratched and propped it up in case it shifts. It's not going to drop and dent or scratch.
Go.
We drop the exhaust so we can get to the right side crane cover case. This cover needs to come off. We're going to remove the cover where your oil filter goes. You want to look at your O-ring and make sure it's in good condition. You can reuse it if you want. I'm going to pull my oil filter out. I'm going to remove the right side crank cover case. And this is the clutch. I need to remove these 5 bolts. After you crack these, you need to unscrew each one 2 turns all the way around. You cannot take one out and then move on to the next one, otherwise the pressure plate will cock. I need to loosen up the nut on the end of the push rod. I'm pulling the clutch plates out, one big stack. You can see there's a friction and then a steel. There's shiny surfaces on the clutch plates where the material has worn out. We're going to use sandpaper to scuff the surface in a non-directional pattern. Now these are the clutch steel plates after they've been scuffed. You'll note there's one that is thicker and it has no holes in it. The back of it has a dirt rub mark from where it sits in the clutch basket. Now I'm going to put the first clutch steel plate in, the thick one, the rub ring. You want the sharp edge facing you. We're going to start installing the friction plates. You're going to note there's little markings on a couple of the flanges. You need to line those up. We're going to alternate a friction plate with the steel plate. When we install the steel plates, you want the sharp edge out. You can see this on the center. They're rounded on one side and sharp on the other. These are sticky.
Okay.
Now the friction plates need to be soaked in oil overnight so that they're not dry when you put them on. Next we're going to put the pressure plate cover on. And you want to make sure that center hex falls all the way in. And then we're going to start by putting the washer and nut back on the center piston. We chose to go with Barnett aftermarket springs to up the pressure on the clutch plate. Now we've gotten all the bolts tightened, 2 turns each all the way around until they're snug, and then tighten them down one last time, and then check the center nut on the push rod. We cleaned the old gasket off the crankcase all the way around. No big chunks. I put a couple dabs of silicone on the outside of the crankcase just to hold the gasket in place while we mount it. We've got the crankcase cover remounted, so we're going to insert our oil filter. Make sure the hole goes in first. Make sure that your O-ring is still intact in your oil filter cover. I'll remount that.
Go.
We got the oil cover back on, tightening down our screws, remembering that the longest screw is the forwardmost. Now we're going to put our derby cover back on. After we tighten down the crankcase, we reattach the pipe to the front header using the 2 screws and the 2 nuts that we removed earlier. Now we need to reattach the front controls. We got the front controls remounted. You got to reattach your springs, and you may need to adjust your brake light to make sure that it works. And since we lost some oil while we were doing this, I'm going to put some back in before we start it up. They're bolts, not fucking screws.